Hi everyone! Today I'm going to show you how to paint an apple. One may think that painting an apple is not so hard, and in fact it's probably not so difficult. What makes a difference though is the level of how you would do it. You could paint it in a very simple amateurish way, or you could paint it like a professional painter, making a much stronger and a much more expressive painting. Here is a couple of examples from the old master paintings. The goal of this tutorial is to show you how to achieve the most out of it. And before we paint, I would like to explain you a couple of things. In this illustration, I would like to show you three basic concepts which I think would be very useful for you to learn. The first one is the concept of the sphere, perhaps one of the main concepts to learn as it applies to almost anything. To the head, to the portrait, to the figure, to many objects just generally. And I think that it would be pretty hard to paint an apple without a good understanding of what the concept of the sphere is. I don't want to go into every detail of the concept of the sphere. It would make the tutorial too long. Perhaps I should make a separate video about it, so write it in the comments if you'd like me to make one. But quite obviously, understanding what the shadow shape is, what the light shape is, what the cast shadow shape is, what the reflection, the midtone, the highlights are, is pretty important. Apple is round, so understanding how the concept of the sphere works would be very helpful. The second concept is a geometric structure of an object. Every object has a geometric structure, and your good understanding of it is crucial. I believe that you could not be a fully professional painter if you don't have a good understanding of perspective and a structure. So this concept is really important, and better you understand it, the stronger will be your work. The third concept is the planes on the surface of the object. Apple kind of looks pretty rounded and smooth, but if you start observing it well, if you start drawing or painting it, you realize that it is made out of really many different smaller and larger planes in there. So in order to make your apple look even more three-dimensional, even more realistic, even more structurally and present, you need to read those planes well, find them, and try sculpting them with your brush in your object. As you can see, besides colors, there's much to learn about the structure and the form of the object. So practicing in each direction would absolutely reinforce your work. Without a good sense of form and without the planes, your apple would probably look just like a party balloon. So first thing to take care for is your setup. Quite obviously, when you paint from life, everything starts with your setup. What you paint should already look interesting and beautiful. In my opinion, it is the light that makes objects look beautiful. It's the light that shows the form of the object in its best way. So when you're trying to set up something, try creating an interesting light effect, the light effect that helps to explain the form of the object and make it as expressive as possible. If you have too much light in your studio, it's possible your object will look too flat. If there's not enough light, it's possible that there's not going to be enough contrast and your object is going to just simply look boring. So when you set up anything, it's absolutely important to see something nice in front of yourself. So build up a shadow box, put the curtains on your windows, move that object around in your room. Try finding the best light solution possible. Learn well how to work in black and white. Learn how to work with the values. Values are a key to a successful painting. If it doesn't look nice when you draw it, most probably it's not going to look any nicer if you paint it. Let's do a quick value study. Alright, a quick example of what you could do as an exercise. A value study is always a great exercise, so perhaps before you paint your apple, you can try drawing it first. Now we're ready to paint. And finally, for my painting, the palette will consist of ivory black, lead white, raw umber, cobalt blue, English red, yellow ochre, and cadmium yellow. I normally use All Holland and Michael Harding's paints, but in this palette almost all of my colors are hand grinded. The beautiful thing about the handmade paints is that you yourself regulate the density and the consistency of the impasto, so when you paint, it allows you to work in a much more sophisticated way and up to the highest standards. There are several ways of how I could approach this painting. For example, I could have started with monochromatic tonal underpainting first and then let it dry and then paint on top. Or I could also work for a longer time. Right now I'm planning to do a Nulla Prima painting, but I could also do more sessions, 2 or 3 or even more sessions if that would be necessary. The brushes I'm going to use are here, the flat brushes. These brushes are of my father. I'm going to use them just because I have left all of my brushes in my studio since we were all in quarantine. But I really enjoy painting with flat square brushes as well, so I don't always use only filberts. So here we go. Basically these are the mixtures that I need right now. A couple of values for the background, a couple of values for my apple, and then main colors for making other mixtures. I'm going to do a lot of brush mixing as well while I paint, so any other temperature that I will have to add, I'll do it while I'm going to be painting. I'm working on primed paper, and right now the surface of it feels a little bit dry. So in order to let myself create like more flowing brush strokes, I'm going to put a little bit of oil into the surface of it. First I'm going to do the background and all the shadow values. It's important to make sure that once you start painting, your color values work properly. If you put some paint on your canvas and you see that it doesn't actually look right, stop for a second, remix it, change it, make sure that you paint with a color values that is correct, that is accurate enough. So don't keep going if you see that your color values aren't actually good enough. If they don't work, just do not continue covering your canvas. Make sure that you're painting with accurate values immediately. The temperatures and the values, they have to make sense right now, because it takes a very short time to fill in the entire canvas with the paint, and it takes a really long time to correct the mistakes. So perhaps you want to try avoiding the mistakes from the very beginning. I can see how the temperature here in this left corner is changing to warmer, so reacting to that. Trying to paint background in a very transparent way. The backgrounds have to always feel like an empty space, like an atmosphere, so you don't want to use too much impasto and too much paint on the backgrounds. Inside of the box there is a much warmer color value there, and then the front of the table is catching some direct light to it, so it looks a little bit cooler. So I'm going to create like a value temperature shift from the back to the front a little. The light on the front of the table isn't only lighter, it is also a little bit cooler than behind the apple. I can see some interesting temperature mixtures on my subject. I can see how it changes from yellow to blue, from gray, green to like slightly purple. So I'm just trying to be flexible enough with how I see all those color values and possibly catch them as much as I can. I personally really like this more impressionist approach to painting, since it kind of makes what you paint look a bit more alive. So I don't really mind my colors looking like a little bit more broken perhaps, and then by the end I'm trying to always give them a bit more of kind of unified look. But right now I'm searching for the values and the temperatures. It's important that while you're painting, you're actually looking at your setup more than at your painting. You really need to see what you're doing. Don't continuously look at your painting and then just try correcting the brush strokes and just make them look nice. When you paint, try understanding well what you're seeing and then try interpreting that as much as it's possible. I'm not saying copying it, but try interpreting it. But for sure you have to step back and you need to look at what you see, because if you go way too far from it, your painting isn't going to be making much sense either. It's going to be way too impressionist and too much just like an illustration. It's not going to have that nice kind of strands and powers that a good painting which is done from life can have to it. This is quite a usual approach that I would normally do. I would try creating the light on my objects just by darkening everything around it first, and then key the lightest part of it. Stepping back, going further away from your painting, in order to better see your painting and your setup together at the same time to compare them is really important, so keep that in mind when working. If you're working seated, it makes it much harder because you cannot get a good sense of like a bigger impression of your painting. So it is absolutely important to once in a while see it from far away. Background is always a very important part of your painting, so you don't want to neglect it. I think working on it enough time is pretty important. Understanding its value, understanding how to handle it technically is quite a big deal, and most of the time painting background is a lot harder than actually painting the object that you're painting. Remember to always keep an eye on the drawing. Accurate drawing is always making your work so much stronger. I'm going to slowly move to paint the apple as well. And as usual, I'm going to start with the shadow. It's mid-tone. I'm trying to apply the brush stroke on the surface of my apple right now, the way I was explaining that when showing that kind of structural drawing with all those planes on it. Just really keeping that idea in my head when putting the paint down on the apple. The brush size kind of has to correspond a little bit to the idea of the bigger or smaller planes that you're trying to be working with in that very moment. So you kind of go from larger to smaller, from smaller to larger once in a while. The whole point is to obviously just make sure that the form is sculpted properly. So you may do the whole work just with bigger brushes, but I think it makes it a bit easier if you actually have like the whole range from bigger to smaller, and that's what I would normally do. I think it's nice to also have some softer brushes besides the hog brushes. It's good to have some Kolinsky, some sable brushes in order to make some of the transitions a little bit more soft. So it doesn't really matter so much what you would paint with as far as the brushes go. What really matters is what it's going to look like once you finished it. And one of the important things that I pay a lot of attention to is the sense of material, how the different surfaces feel in my painting, because in real life all those surfaces are very different. Some of them are much smoother, some of them are rougher and more opaque, some are made of wood, some are made of steel, some are made out of marble, I don't know, glass, whatever you can imagine. So if you paint everything kind of in the same way, you're certainly going to make your painting look so much more boring. While if you try interpreting and explaining a little bit better what is a heavy material, what is a light material, what is a glossy and opaque materials, your painting is going to look so much more realistic. So changing languages from area to area, painting a drapery like in a slightly thinner way, for example, and then painting apple with more impasto to say, or like more opaque in front where the light is, and then more transparent behind where the emptiness is adding a lot to your work. It's making it just so much more beautiful and so much more interesting to look at, and you would never ever get bored of such a painting. So I'm gonna add a little bit of light now. Still trying to follow the form structure here and never stop doing that till the end. It's a little bit warmer on the top, it's a bit yellower and less green right here on the top, so I need to change that a little. While mixing lighter and darker paint on the apple, trying to create some transitions little by little. Ignoring the highlight for a moment. The highlight is right here, but I need to catch the general value relation, so I'm not going to think about it so much right now. So right now I'm just mapping in some color values, trying to improve the general apple shape a little bit. But quite obviously it is I'm not only working on the flat shapes, I'm just trying to combine, like thinking of the shape but also pushing the sense of the form at the same time, kind of. Quite obviously the stronger is the shape design, the stronger is the sense of the form. There's not only a big shape of the apples there, but there are some smaller shapes in there as well, such as shadow shapes or like the midtone shapes or the highlight shapes. So more accurately you design them, the better will be the idea of the form and its structure, quite obviously. The paint is very fresh, so it's kinda very easy to adjust the edges. And here you start thinking a lot about the concept of the sphere, because you know that this part is more in front, the edges are further away, and so they definitely have to be a little bit softer than the edges which maybe are closer to you. I have this edge right here and I have that edge right there, so quite obviously one is more distant, one is closer, and you need to show the difference, otherwise your apple will look pretty flat. It will not feel like a form in space. That is a part of atmospheric perspective, and of course atmospheric perspective is one of those concepts that is also crucial to learn for a painter. The way I like painting is making every brush stroke a little plane on the surface, so sculpting it continuously, never ever polishing any surfaces and always trying to leave a brush stroke in there. Particularly on the objects which are having the volume to them. Just going to keep the value a little bit higher now. So when you paint with lead white, it's not so easy because it is slightly transparent, so you need to pick up like a good amount of paint, otherwise you just can't properly keep the value. But the good thing about it is that it makes the impasto look really interesting, very painterly. Right now my mind is juggling with all the aspects of the painting that could only exist. Technique, the paint application, the values, the drawings, the temperatures, the edges, atmospheric perspective. So basically you can properly paint something when all of these components are coming together in one painting. You can see a much softer shadow edge here, and I'm gonna soften this right now. Already did. So I covered the whole the whole canvas with the color, and now I can start refining it. I can start making it all be painted a bit more delicately and make it look a bit more kind of finished, a little bit less sketchy and a little bit more resolved. Little by little I'm trying to find some smaller little shapes and planes and get more accurate on designing them. Darkening the values which are closer to the edges to turn the form of the apple a bit better. Softening edge a little bit. That part of the apple is further away from me, so I kind of like how it feels a little bit more soft than other edges. Just trying to overlap some background on my apple and my apple on the background just a little bit to create a better sense of atmosphere there. One of the things that I also really want to do here is create a little bit of the halo coming from the apple into the atmosphere all around it, because it's reflecting quite a bit of light. So normally it makes the sense of the atmosphere so much stronger if there is a little bit of that light kind of bouncing back off into the atmosphere. But I'm going to do that later. Right now I just need to model the form of the pear in the first place. It looks pretty green and yellow, but if you look better it actually has some slightly redder, slightly yellowish temperatures to it as well, so you just can't really paint it with only like blue and yellow. There's many more temperatures in there that you need to catch. It's making a stronger accent right under the apple. There's a really dark shadow in there. It's like one of the darkest values in the whole painting. The edge down there is also hiding in the shadow, so I don't want to leave it too sharp looking. Trying to refine the form. Softening some of the edges. Time to get the highlight in. My brush strokes are getting smaller and smaller as I'm trying to model the forms with a bit more accuracy and in a more subtle way. But at the same time I'm using more impasto. I'm using a thicker paint right here in the middle. Trying to move my brush strokes around the highlight in order to give the apple like a better sense of a round form. It's pretty warm inside here. Trying to add some warmer temperature. Darkening the further side of the apple a bit. As I said before, I'm just trying to make sure that every brushstroke that I'm leaving on my apple is turning into some sort of little plane, and making sure that all of these planes are helping me to explain the structure and the form of the apple in the best way. I want to go back to background real quick. Trying to add an even better sense of transparency to the background by taking off a bit of paint while it is still fresh. I like the change of language in how I kind of render different surfaces. Softening some of the edges just a little bit. Back to modeling the form more. Softening the edges which are more distant. Painting the highlight a little bit thicker. One of the strongest accents is right down here. So trying to make sure that it explains the edge of the apple properly and that it helps to turn the formula stronger. Stronger accents also right over here, right in the middle of the apple. Also one of the sharpest edges in there. I can put a little accent on it. Almost forgot about this little tail. Has a little bit of a purple color to it, kind of. The light shape right here is still bothering me a little bit. I might just make it a tiny bit darker. It seems to be jumping out a little too much, so let's knock it down a bit. Yep, it's a lot better. Some more thicker paint right in the middle. Just a bit more transparency effect in this left corner. Lifting off a little bit of fresh paint, it kind of helps to make it look a bit more painterly. Stronger accent right here to push the sense of roundness of the apple. Move the camera a little bit just to be able to walk far away and have a better look, to add like a couple of final brush strokes. I'm going to make a highlight just a little bit stronger and then I'm done. And there we go. Finished. In this final part, I should mention perhaps the main thing about painting. All the things that I spoke about in this video, such as values, structure, atmospheric perspective, and other things, are only a few tools that you need to acquire in order to make a painting. And even if this is what the painting is made of, your main focus should be devoted to capturing the spirit and the emotion that your subject is giving to you when you look at it. Catching life and catching the essence of why you even paint at all is what the painting should be about.